This says STEP BD. This is the largest study on bipolar disorder. It says 2004, although it was completed about 2 years ago. Huge study, though, and this is what they found in terms of onset. So there's really a significant number of people have bipolar disorder that have pre-adolescent onset. But as we're going to see, these are really, in some ways, fundamentally a different condition. It's much more severe, much more malignant, harder to treat. So for practical purposes, we can assume that the clinical picture and then also the treatments that work after a person is completely through puberty, then bipolar in teenagers looks much like it does with adults. So there's really two versions. There's pre-adolescent onset, and then there's the more standard bipolar disorder. Now, bipolar in kids, often misdiagnosed, and part of the reason for this is because 70% of these kids, their first 1 or 2 episodes is major depression. So they have no history of mania, okay? And this is probably one of the main reasons for misdiagnosis is because they look just like somebody that might have unipolar depression. When they have mania, a very small percentage are going to have euphoric mania, but typically what they present with is mixed mania. And this has significant clinical implications that we're going to get to a little bit later. When you get true mania in children, it tends to not be episodic. So, back in the days before they had any treatments, for mania, and they would just put people in the hospital and necessary put them in restraints or knock them out with barbiturates or what have you, and just wait for it to run its course. A typical manic episode would be about 3 months, and then people would come out of it. Okay, so Kreplin was right. Back in the early part of the 20th century, clearly cyclic, episodic condition. He was right on the money. But when you have pre-adolescents who get into mania, they get locked into it, and it can last for a year or 2. So you don't have it's more of becomes more of a chronic and stable condition rather than being episodic. As I said before, it's most of the time it's a dysphoric mania, and with dysphoria, you not only have depression but a lot of irritability, and intense rage episodes. Now, this shouldn't be a problem, but sometimes it is, and that is trying to discriminate between, is this a case of severe ADHD versus childhood mania? And one reason that this is sometimes problematic is because they share a lot of symptoms, okay? Hyperactivity, inability to pay attention, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of symptomatic overlap, but actually the diagnosis I don't think is that hard to make the differential diagnosis, mainly since ADHD there's obviously behavioral problems that are apparent that are clearly there as infants or very young children. Okay, so very early onset, and where bipolar in children, it's extraordinarily rare prior to the age of 6. Okay, so the age of onset is one issue. The other issue is that ADHD also runs in families, and so does bipolar. So if you get good family history, you're going to see mood disorders with the bipolar kids. You're going to see ADHD with the ADHD kids. But this was a study done in IMH, and what they wanted to look at is what particular symptoms might differentiate mania, chronic childhood mania, from severe ADHD, and here they are. Okay, now decreased need for sleep in older teenagers and adults. Almost everybody that has mania has decreased need for sleep, not insomnia. Person's sleeping 5 hours a night, 4 hours a night, and they're not tired. I mean, that's a one manic symptom I would love to have, to be able to get by on really small amounts of sleep. In these kids, it's not nearly that high, but the 40% represents bipolar kids and 6% for kids that have very severe ADHD. Okay, so that's enough of a difference that it does discriminate. Now, some ADHD kids have insomnia, but they're tired, okay? But with true mania, people are not sleeping, but they're not tired during the day, okay? Hypersexuality, also, these are significantly different. It's not 0 in ADHD, but it's quite high. And here with children, with adults and teenagers, it's rampant promiscuity. But with little kids, hypersexuality usually shows up in their play, for instance, with dolls, or drawings that are sexualized, or highly sexualized language, or touching other kids or adults inappropriately. And I'm sure all of you know that hypersexuality is seen a lot in kids that have been molested. And so the caveat here is you've got to really make sure that this is not due to a history of sexual abuse, okay? But when that has really been ruled out, then hypersexuality certainly does exist in these kids. This is probably the hallmark symptom of mania in children, are intense rage episodes. And you really get a lot of temper tantrums occurring across a broad spectrum of kids that have different kinds of problems. Conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, obviously ADHD. Kids that just are under a lot of stress, and a lot of normal kids occasionally will have temper tantrums. But what is really different about this, and it's just not seen in any other disorder at all, it's not only intense rages, and here there oftentimes is violence and aggression. These kids will smash toys, maybe break windows, they hit their parents or their siblings and stuff like this. But what really distinguishes it from anything else is the duration. And these intense rages go on from 2 to 4 hours. And the thing is, nobody can keep up that level of intensity. What I'd like to ask you to do, this is a little homework assignment. I want you to go home tonight. Tell your family, just bear with me, okay? For the next 2 hours, I'm gonna throw this whopping temper tantrum, and just fake it, scream and yell, and punch your hand through the wall, and see what happens. I mean, just pull out all the stops, and what'll happen is after about 15 minutes, you're just gonna feel worn out. Nobody can keep up that level of intensity, okay? And if you're working a psych unit and somebody comes in and they're manic, they're walking around, they're talking 100 miles an hour like this, and they're pacing up and down, and they're going like this all day long for like 14 hours. Like, where do they get this energy? Where does this come from? It's mania, okay? They just can't. It's like the ever-ready battery kind of thing, So that really, is the most pronounced symptom that says, hey, this kid's got bipolar disorder, okay? And you just don't see it at all in ADHD, the prolonged rages. But keep in mind, 92%, it's not 100%. So not having this doesn't mean you don't have bipolar, but having it probably is highly likely to suggest bipolar. Morbid dreams, I don't have any statistics on this, but this is very interesting and kind of curious. Lots of kids have nightmares. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about dreams that are grotesque. And lots of kids, are being chased by a dinosaur, or a lion or a boogeyman or something like this. But almost always they get away. But in these morbid dreams, oftentimes they are caught, and they actually see their like arms being ripped off, or their intestines being pulled out. It's just grotesque. And probably the only other group of kids that will have this level of morbidity, in their dreams, maybe in kids that have had extremely severe physical abuse. And there's just been no explanation. The experts say, who knows? Why would that happen with bipolar? It's just hard to know. And the final thing is that ADHD, predictable behavior every single morning is basically the same thing. And if you have a kid that has ADHD or you have patients you work with, it's the same thing every morning. You get up and you cram Ritalin down their throat, and in 45 minutes then things will calm down. But at 45 minutes, look out, they're making weird noises and jumping on the furniture, and driving everybody crazy, and and then they calm down. But it's the same thing, once they wake up. But with bipolar mania, you get a lot of variability, so that some mornings you may get something like that, okay, goofiness or something. But a lot of times you get extreme irritability, and just pissed off about everything, or they're morose. you know, and they're staring out the window, and they look sad and defeated and so forth. So anyway, if you take a look at this and you put it together with the age of onset and family history, then that goes a long way to, you know, really help make what I think is a reasonably easy diagnosis. But we're going to see there are other disorders that oftentimes are mistaken for bipolar disorder. Okay. I'm going to focus completely separately on teenagers and adults because treatment of kids is in a totally different universe, I think. Realistic medical prophylaxis, chronic treatment after the first episode. Okay, now what this means is you get diagnosed, if you happen to get diagnosed accurately as having bipolar disorder, and that happens most often when people have a full-blown manic episode. There's just no doubt about it. But regardless of whether it's depression or mania, you get diagnosed, every competent psychiatrist is going to say, okay, now look, we've got to try different medications. We need to get you stabilized and out of this episode, but you've got to stay on this medication, and you've got to stay on it for the rest of your life. Now, because medications have side effects, we may have to do some medicine adjustment. We have to try this drug or that drug, but eventually we'll find the best combination, but you've got to stay on it. Please, please, please stay on it, okay? But what is realistic, okay? Now, most people that have classic, I shouldn't use the word classic because I don't want to confuse you, but have typical bipolar disorder, teenagers or adults, the time period between their first episode and their second episode, on average, is 18 months. So these people have an episode, and it's severe, and they get put on these drugs that make them feel horrible, usually. We'll look at the side effects after a while. And they get out a number of months, and they're not manic and they're not depressed, and they start thinking, well, you know, maybe they were wrong. You know, maybe I don't have this. I'm doing a lot better now that I'm back in denial. And some studies have suggested that as many as 90% of people that are given this very persuasive song and dance about you got to take it for the rest of your life within the first year will stop taking their medicine. Okay? Because number one, they're not symptomatic. Number two, medicine makes them feel horrible. They're gaining weight and they can't, you know, stay awake during the day and all this other kind of stuff. They stop the medicine and guess what? Hey, 6 months have gone by. I don't have any depression. I don't have any mania. They were wrong. I don't have it. And wham, they have another psychotic manic episode. So typically, you know, you can talk about what ought to be done, but in the real world, the vast majority of people it's going to take 2 or sometimes 3 episodes before they start getting the message that, okay, I guess, you know, they're right. Okay, and that's the rule rather than the exception.